This offseason has certainly been an interesting one so far, with tons of big trades being made, top players moving around in free agency, teams getting bold with the moves they're making, and intrigue amongst the rookie class coming in. But with it has also come some questionable decisions as well. Not every team can say they've made themselves better this offseason, and even the ones that can say that can't say they've necessarily had perfect offseasons by any means either, and that brings us to the topic of today's video. This topic will be divided up into two parts, with today and tomorrow's videos, but we'll be going through every team in the NBA, identifying their biggest L, meaning the worst thing that happened to them this offseason, starting today with the Eastern Conference teams, then tomorrow we'll discuss the Western Conference teams. These quote-unquote L's can include free agent signings, bad trades, draft picks, and anything else along those lines in between. Before we start though, it turns out about 60% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. Going in alphabetical order by city, we'll start things off with the Atlanta Hawks, and their biggest L so far this offseason is losing Onyeka Okongwu for half the season next year because of surgery. Now, I just want to start off right away by saying that this is obviously a nitpick of a choice for today's topic, but admittedly, the Hawks have had a pretty good offseason so far, so finding a bad move on their part was really tough. Injuries and surgeries obviously aren't anything the team can control, but still, losing him for at least the first half of the season is a tough blow after he started to really begin to look comfortable down the stretch of last season during his rookie year for them. Next up is the Boston Celtics, and their biggest L of the offseason is trading Moses Brown for Josh Richardson. The Celtics had a weirdly disappointing season last year, finishing as the 7 seed and getting eliminated in round 1, and this offseason the weirdness has followed suit. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown had to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the team last year, and now after losing both Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, they're going to have to carry even more of that offensive load, and Josh Richardson is not the type of player to alleviate that. He's now struggled offensively 2 seasons in a row for 2 different teams, and that level of inconsistency is a big downgrade from what the team had a year ago, while still not addressing their subpar bench unit either. Next up is the Brooklyn Nets, and their biggest L of the offseason is allowing Jeff Green to walk in free agency. Again, this one's also a bit of a nitpick because the Nets, too, have had a pretty good offseason based on what they were working with. They didn't have a lot of money at their disposal, but Green seems like the perfect versatility guy to have in a rotation of a team as talented as the Nets are, and the Nuggets were able to sign Green away from them for less than $5 million per year, which still isn't that much money, so even though they'll still probably be fine without him, he is an awesome player to have to fill some of the gaps around their superstars. Up next is the Charlotte Hornets, and their biggest L of the offseason is losing Malik Monk in free agency. Monk did admittedly have a rocky start to his NBA career in Charlotte, but last season we finally saw a breakthrough with him, and he started to play his best basketball. On the season as a whole, he averaged about 12 points per game while shooting over 40% from 3, and he looked more comfortable and confident as a shot creator than ever. He could end up being the Lakers' secret weapon as the team who signed him away for cheap, and for a young team like the Hornets to not want to retain him, it may end up being a regret. Next up is the Chicago Bulls, and their biggest L of the offseason was overpaying so much for DeMar DeRozan. The Bulls are another team that has a pretty strong offseason so far, and in a vacuum, the addition of DeRozan is by no means a negative one, but the price they paid to get him can definitely be debated. First, the fact that they lost impactful veteran and leader Thaddeus Young in the sign-and-trade that got DeRozan to Chicago hurts enough already, but then the fact that the Bulls paid him about $27 million per year for 3 years is another questionable call for a player past his prime. I'm not sure any team other than the Bulls were offering that much money for him, but I guess in the end the Bulls want to be a playoff contender, and in that sense, DeRozan does definitely help. Next up is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and their biggest L of the offseason is burning bridges with Sexton, then not even trading him. For a while now, we've seen tons of reports come out about how Colin Sexton isn't apparently part of the Cavaliers' future plans. People within the organization have disrespected his playstyle and fit enough despite their desire to rebuild, and almost everything pointed towards his tenure in Cleveland being over. He's coming off of a season where he scored 24 points per game too, so there definitely would have been a market for him via trade. Yet now, it seems as though he's not going anywhere before the start of the season. It's gonna be an awkward situation for both sides, and I'm under the belief that it would be best for both of them to move on at this point. Up next, we have the Detroit Pistons, and their biggest L of the offseason is giving Kelly Olynyk a somewhat hefty long-term contract. It's always a bit confusing when a tanking team clearly focusing on youth and player development pays up for a veteran, and while sometimes the deals can make sense, this one I don't think does. Olynyk played some of his best basketball with Houston last year while they were tanking, but that made me think that he was playing his way into the interest of a winning team, but instead, he'll continue to potentially play himself up on a rebuilding squad while stealing minutes away from some of the other younger guys on the squad that should be the priority. The next team up is the Indiana Pacers, and their biggest L of the offseason is doubling down on the Miles Turner-Domantas Sabonis pairing by not trading either of them. Any of you who have been watching my videos for a while now know how much I've emphasized that I don't think this pairing works out very well, so for the team to not even explore trades for either is a bit confusing to say the least. I know it's a tough situation because they're both two of the team's best players, but every metric and every number tells us that the team is better when they're not on the court together, because they're both best suited to play the center position, and that's not a recipe for success for a team that just missed the playoffs. Up next is the Miami Heat, and their biggest L of the offseason is overpaying Duncan Robinson. Duncan Robinson emerged 2 seasons ago as a lights-out sharpshooter, but last season he regressed a bit and some of his weaknesses began to get exposed. Don't get me wrong, he still did shoot 41% from deep on a pretty high volume of attempts, which is very good for a player in his role. However, he's a pretty poor defender that tended to get isolated by opposing teams and taken advantage of. He's still not much of a scorer inside the arc, and if his shot's not falling from deep, he struggles to make an impact elsewhere. Paying someone like that $18 million per year after having 2 good seasons at 27 years old is very bold, and probably their worst move in what was a mostly positive offseason otherwise. Up next is the Milwaukee Bucks, and their biggest L of the offseason is losing PJ Tucker to a conference rival. Obviously, when you're the defending champions, there aren't many things to complain about for the Milwaukee Bucks in this situation, but PJ Tucker brought a level of competitiveness and toughness to their starting lineup down the stretch of the season, and to see him leave them after winning it all to play for an East rival in the Miami Heat has to hurt a bit. He's definitely not the player he once was, and offensively he doesn't give much, but leadership and defensive effort do go a long way. Next up, we have the New York Knicks, and their biggest L of the offseason was their efforts in the NBA draft. This year's draft class was very deep, so for the Knicks to have 2 first-round picks at 19 and 21 overall in the first round, they definitely could have come away with some real talent, but they chose to trade both of those picks, one to trade down, and the other for a protected future first-round pick. They ended up drafting Quentin Grimes, which is a decent pickup, but I can't help but think they squandered a good opportunity here. Up next is the Orlando Magic, and their biggest L of the offseason is signing Robin Lopez. Wendell Carter is a promising young center that can be the anchor of the team's future, and after the trade deadline, we also got to see more Mo Bamba in extended minutes in a bigger role off the bench. So for the team to sign Lopez to eat away at both of their minutes when the team's focus is clearly on rebuilding and development just doesn't make much sense to me. There aren't enough minutes to play all of them throughout a game, so again, just a confusing addition based on the team's priorities. Next up, we have the Philadelphia 76ers, and their biggest L of the offseason is bringing in Andre Drummond. Nothing about this move makes any sense, from the dynamic of what the team needed from a backup center, to the chemistry in the locker room, to everything in between. It's no secret that Joel Embiid and Andre Drummond don't exactly like each other based on previous matchups, and after a year where the Sixers bench was anchored by Dwight Howard and struggled because of the lack of spacing, it's baffling to bring in Drummond, who also can't space the floor at all. Up next, we have the Toronto Raptors, and their biggest L of the offseason ended up being the fact that they lost Kyle Lowry. They had plenty of solid trade offers to sell him at the trade deadline last season, but they chose not to take any of those offers. So for them to then end up losing him in a sign-and-trade that brought in significantly less value than what was offered to them previously at the deadline is a regret for sure. They didn't even end up making the playoffs last year, so they held on to him for nothing in the end. Lowry is obviously a legend in Raptors franchise history, so it is tough to accept the reality of the situation, but now that we have hindsight, they definitely ended up losing a lot of value because of that decision. And finally, the last team in the East is the Washington Wizards, and their biggest L of the offseason was accepting the Lakers' trade offer for Russell Westbrook. When the rumors of the Lakers being interested in Westbrook first leaked, everyone was laughing at the prospect of them having enough assets to actually acquire him, so for the Wizards to actually accept their offer of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Montrezl Harrell, and Kyle Kuzma along with some picks for him might be the biggest L we discussed today. Westbrook may be erratic at times, but he's going to be a great third option for the Lakers this year, and now Bradley Beal is once again stuck with middling talent around him at the height of his career. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below which one of these that we discussed you think is the worst. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.